What does identity and belonging mean to us? In the UK, we have been reading of Azim Rafiq's heartbreaking testimony of not having a sense of belonging within the Yorkshire Cricket Club. He did not fit in. But how would it feel if we did not have a sense of identity or belonging in our own family? That is usually the one place most of us can be ourselves. Yet there are many who do not have that privilege. This is Between Us, Stories of Unconscious Bias. I am Smita Tharoor. Hello, I'd like to introduce Nick Pendry. Nick identifies as a brown Indian man. He is married to a woman and lives in southeast London with his 2 teenage children. Nick was adopted as a baby by a white English family. He's a social worker and family therapist who has spent his entire working life in the public sector. I'm looking forward to chatting with Nick about stories of unconscious bias. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me, Smith. It's lovely to be here and to have this conversation with you.
So Nick, unconscious bias, what do you understand by those words?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I understand the idea of how we each, have pre-existing ideas, beliefs that influence our thoughts and behaviour, and that some of those ideas and beliefs we may not be fully aware of until we experience ourselves behaving or thinking in particular ways in relation to particular people. And for me, one of the things that is one of the many things that is most significant about being a person of colour, a brown person, having been brought up in the 70s in an exclusively white English family, but in an almost exclusively white English context, is that the ideas and beliefs that I have gained have been transmitted down through my parents, my grandparents, have influenced the way in which I think and behave, not only towards people of colour, but to other peoples too. And those ideas and beliefs, I think, I'm having a constant experience of them becoming more. I become more aware of those as days go on. So whether we language that as moving from unconscious to conscious, that's probably not a language I would use. I would use it as moving from not being aware to being aware.
I get that, Nick, because of so many things that you've just said, and also the introduction. How I introduced you, the fact that your culture, your upbringing is all white English, and yet the first line that I read out about you is that Nick Pendry identifies as a brown Indian man. I mean, that's very specific, brown and Indian. It could be Mauritian, it could be Guyanese, it could be Pakistani, it could be Sri Lankan. Lots of brown people who look like you and me. And so I just found that quite curious, that whole idea of it. But could you perhaps share a story with us to give us a little more understanding?
I think the most significant story is the way that I think about adoption is that adoption is a lifelong event that happens in a moment in time. So I was adopted as a 6-month-old baby. I'm now a 49-year-old man, and not a day goes past where I don't have an idea about being adopted, or have a thought, or something happens, and I pull myself back and think, oh yeah, I'm adopted. So it may have been a conversation that we had yesterday with my wife and some friends around dementia. My mum, in the family that I was adopted into, has advanced Alzheimer's, and of course we know that there's a hereditary component to that, and me and my wife and some friends were talking about this. One of the many things that happens when you're adopted, particularly when you're adopted in the 70s, is that there's no real record of medical conditions that your birth parents may or may not have had. That's kind of up to you to find out, and work out, either by having those conversations with birth parents, if you can find them, or not. But there's no way of getting that information. So I'm coming to the story. So one of the so I had a great need when I was growing up and experiencing all of this whiteness around me, to think about where I came from, which is why you picked up on the brown Indian man, and to have an idea about where I belonged, and what my particular sense of identity was, from looking at photos of myself with my family and identifying myself as the brown person in the white family, and wanting to find my birth parents. And this took me on a search that I started when I was a teenager. But when I completed it, I was in my 20s. And a little later on, I found myself in a situation where I was visiting my birth aunt, who happens to be an academic in North America at the University of British Columbia. And I was in her home having dinner with her and her mother, with some food that her mother had just prepared, and found myself thinking, I'm not quite sure how I got here, or where I fit, or how I belong, or what I think about these people, but I'm here. Um, and it was a real it was a real moment for me, in the sense that I was thinking, this is how my life might have been, and I have all kinds of ideas and beliefs about people who look like this, who eat this food, who talk in Gujarati, and those ideas have come from a different experience that I had, but I was denied this experience, and that was a powerful moment for me.
I bet it was. And thank you so much for sharing that, Nick. I'm just visualizing you sitting in that house in America and feeling what you felt. Because, I mean, those of us who are not adopted will not even begin to understand how you must have felt. But I'm sure there are many people who have been adopted that it will resonate with them. And so when we're talking about how we're thinking, you've also said that you do family therapy. Um, so this was part of your story, wasn't it? I'm just guessing. You go down the route of social work and family therapy
Yeah,
because of your childhood and your upbringing,
yeah,
or
yeah. Well, absolutely. It was, again. I think it was probably. I don't think I was fully aware that was why I was making those kinds of decisions in that moment. Um, but there were decisions that I was making that uh, were coming from somewhere, and I had this sense that I wanted to be in a position where I was helping people, where I was doing something that might be helpful and useful. And I think I also had an idea about wanting to support people that look like me, but I'm not sure it was I'm not sure it was fully formed at the time, and certainly not when I trained to be a social worker. And then a bit later on, when I trained to become a family therapist, so much of family therapy training is around having doing some work in thinking around your own identity, where you fit, your own family of origin. That it then became a bit clearer. And I remember very starkly doing my family therapy training, and we had an exercise to do, which is drawing our own family of origin genograms with a partner. This kind of workshop, experiential workshop thing that you do as part of the course. That's very familiar to family therapists and very familiar to social workers too. And I found myself sitting with someone that I didn't know very well at all, being a colleague on my course, and us sitting together and drawing up our family genograms, and me thinking, well, this is my family genogram is not straightforward. So how do I do this without having a whole conversation about being adopted and being adopted by a white family and what that means. How do I do that? Maybe I don't want to have that conversation, or maybe I don't want to have that conversation right now. But that's a conversation that's massively significant in why I'm here and what I'm doing and what I want to do. So I went from this position of trying to gloss over it and not really engaging in the exercise because I didn't want to disclose who I was and how I got there, to where I am now, where it's much more. I can't not disclose it, right? Because people make sense of who I am by the way I talk and my name, and they might not have met me and may assume or position me in a particular racial category or a particular class category, unless I correct them. So being adopted and being adopted by a white family, but being a brown Indian man who doesn't speak any Indian language, and who has, to all intents and purposes, a white sounding name, I, my every day has to be a full disclosure.
Right. So I'm just trying to think about, you said a few things, Nick, which I kind of want to just summarize for my own sake. One was the idea of the fact that you went down the route of family therapy and social work instinctively, which was obviously what we call our unconscious bias. You didn't even know what was happening. And it was only during the training, and you did not want to have a full disclosure at that point, because it comes back to this whole idea of the word identity, which I want to explore a little bit more, because you've done a lot of work yourself in it, in terms of the training that you've had, both with social work and family therapy. And so I'm wondering whether you can talk to us a little bit more about your learning and your stories around identity, and what you've taken away from that.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's the learning is that feeling a sense of belonging, of where I fit, how I fit, and what that means has been incredibly important for my own sense of um, wellness. Whether we construct that in terms of emotional stability or mental health, but having a sense of this is where I fit, this is where I belong, this is my tribe, is really important.
But I was going to ask you the word belonging, because you've used that a few
Yeah,
times. And I want to just explore that word itself, because, most of us take a lot of things for granted, about identity and about belonging. And it's because of your personal life experiences that you've obviously questioned those words. So when you say my tribe, I mean, you grew up in a loving white English family. You belonged there. They loved you. You were part of that family. Am I correct?
partly. Um, in many ways that's an accurate description, and in many ways it's not. There were challenges in that family. There were relationship difficulties. There were mental health difficulties. There were views that were held that would be seen to be racist now, but were maybe part of the mainstream kind of white discourse about race in the 70s. So did I feel I belong there? No, I
So it's
didn't.
about how you see yourself. Isn't that what you're saying, Nick?
Yeah, yeah. I don't. From seeing a family photo uh, uh, to having an experience as an adolescent where I begin to think this doesn't quite feel right. This doesn't quite feel like the place that I belong. Nobody looks like me. So it doesn't feel like a fit, and I move outside of that family environment into the white context. And remember, this is London, in the 70s, early 80s. London in the 70s and early 80s is not the same as it is now. It was at time, depending on where you were, it was a brutally racist place. So I was reminded in every environment that I was in outside of that family home that this wasn't a place that I belonged. In school, walking the streets, going into shops. That was my day-to-day experience. So the sense of belonging is, I have a family where these people are white and they're telling me I belong, but I go outside into all of these other contexts, and I'm given the message very, very clearly that I don't belong. So how do you make sense of that? Well, I made sense of that by searching for somewhere where I did belong and fit, but I didn't belong and fit in other Indian families and other families that looked like me, because I didn't speak their language, I didn't eat their food, I didn't have the same cultural norms or reference points. So I didn't fit there, and was searching for somewhere where I did fit or belonged.
I mean, I hear the word confusion, even though you didn't use that word, and it certainly sounds like it. Especially, I'm visualizing you, when you're 12, 14, when young people, teenagers are beginning to become more aware of themselves, of their sexuality, about their friendships, their identity. There are so many different things that are now falling into place, and for you, there must have been an enormous amount of confusion. Um, but continue, Nick. I'd love to hear another story if you could possibly share for us to understand a little bit more about you.
I mean, if I take the belonging thing
Please do.
into a story. So, I as I was growing up, I had this search for my birth parents, and that search was in parts successful and helpful, in terms of getting me to a point where I thought, I belong, I feel okay here. This is part of who I am. It's a challenge, and not without its difficulties in many ways and in many relationships. But there was a moment, maybe when I was in my kind of mid to late 20s, where I had an opportunity to go with my birth aunt, to India. And of course, I've been wanting to go for many years. My birth family had moved from India to East Africa probably a couple of generations ago, but I had begun to identify myself as being an Indian man, and I'd never been to India. So how does that fit an Indian person who's never been to India? But I went, and I got there, and I remember having a few days where I was just travelling around on my own, and I remember this very, very clearly. I was in Delhi, and they'd just done this new underground system, which is all kind of singing and all dancing underground system, and I got myself onto a train, and I sat down, and I looked at everyone around me, and I thought, oh my goodness, everyone's brown. They look like I do. And I know for many people have had that experience, but I've never had it hit me in a way that it never hit me before. And I thought, maybe this is where I fit or belong. Yeah, it was a moment.
I bet it was. As you know, I am from India, grew up in India, with a firm sense of I'm choosing the same word you did, identity. Um, I know where my parents came from, my grandparents on both sides, and I have a very firm sense of my identity. And it is only arriving in this country that I looked around and realized and acknowledged, naive me, that there were many people who looked like me. For example, you, who if I'd known you 25, 30 years ago, who would not have had that same sense of belonging and identity, which is very, very powerful. I mean, I was deliberately pushing you on this, Nick, forgive me, because I've thought long and hard about the idea of belonging and identity and how it influences us as human beings and pretty much so much that we do. So I just wanted to kind of explore that a little bit more with you.
Mm.
Um, so was there any sort of, you had this moment sitting in the metro, in the
Mm.
underground in Delhi. You had another moment which was also equally powerful, sitting in a home, eating Gujarati food in a
Yeah,
birth family in America.
yeah,
But tell us a little bit more about your understanding and development of who you are, how you are, and so on.
yeah, yeah. I think and it's not that question in a way presupposes that it's Oh, I'm sure it doesn't from the way that you've asked it. From the way that I've heard it, it presupposes that there's a journey that's happened and there's a destination point that I may have reached or may not have reached. Um, I don't see it. I don't see it like that. So I see that I see my life and experiences as a constant search for belonging, a constant way of thinking about myself, and constructing an identity which shifts and changes, which is dynamic in different situations. Um, I think the sense of identifying as a brown Indian man has gone through an emotional and political and academic journey. So part of my degree studies, part of my particular interest and writing around race and racism, particularly in the field in which I work in family therapy, has been significant in helping me position myself in relation to what I think about being a brown Indian man adopted by white parents living in a racist society, and how I experience that, and how I can feel more comfortable with my relationship with that experience and those experiences and how it shapes me. Um, and I think the experience that I have in the family that I currently inhabit as a husband and as a father to two mixed race children married to a white woman has allowed me to have a sense of belonging in a very real family unit that is massively important now, because I feel that my extended families are not families that birth family and adoptive family are not families that I belong to in a way that I'm a kind of native inhabitant. But the family that I've constructed, I'm clearly front and center, um, belonging in that, because that's we've set our own ways of doing family, we've set our own rules, and we've set our own relationships and the way that we do them as critical to our family life. Um, so in some ways that sense of belonging is there now. What's really interesting is how my children as teenagers are beginning to explore their own sense of belonging and what it means for them to have a brown Indian father and a white English mother, to inhabit their current particular mixed race experiences and context, and where they position themselves in relation to their racial identity, where they come from. Um, I had a very interesting conversation with my daughter just a couple of weeks ago, when she was saying she had talked to her teacher at school about history. She's doing her GCSEs about history, and had raised the question that half of her um, family history is Indian, and how come she never gets taught that at school? What's that about? Because she doesn't want to learn about white English history, because it only speaks to half of her of who she is.
Absolutely, yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and my son, who takes a different approach, and what does that mean for them in how they see their belonging and identity, and where they'll end up, who knows.
So it's all about stories, isn't it? And about how these stories, and this is what I feel as well. And it's fluid, and something else will happen in your life, or your daughter's life, or your son's life, or your wife's life, doesn't matter. Um, that will influence them yet again. I mean, we're speaking particularly under the context of you, because you and I are having a conversation about how you see yourself and your identity. But that's not to say that other people who do not have the same experiences as you may still question the idea of belonging, of identity, of fitting in, and so on. It doesn't have to be the simple, what I'm calling the skin color and the ethnicity. It could be something else. It could be sexuality. It could be all kinds of different things. It could be just growing up in a home that you don't fit into, because just emotionally, mentally, you just are very different. You're a maverick in a home that goes down a certain path. And
Yeah.
how do you break away from that? So it could be even simpler. But no,
It
I
could be.
just find this very fascinating. So Nick, could you share with us? You talk about identity, about belonging. You talk about the fact that you work in social work and family therapy. Have you had experiences that perhaps in your work that has taught you something about your own understanding of belonging and identity?
So it's the position that I'm in my chosen career in social work is um, uh, I work as a senior manager in a social work organisation for a council now, and one of the things that I have to do as part of my job is give the approval on behalf of the Children's Services Organisation for children who we may be proposing a plan of adoption for them, and to consider that, to consider the implications of that decision, as to whether it's the right decision in law, whether it's the right decision for that child, and all that goes with that. And uh, these moments when I read about a child's life and I read about the thinking around a decision to remove a child from their birth family and to place a child in an adoptive family, I take massively seriously, because it's the most important decision that I can make at work. And of course, I bring my own ideas and beliefs, my own bias, unconscious or conscious, to those decisions, and I am constantly learning about myself whilst also thinking about whether that is the decision that would be right for that child. And in many ways, how well, the question I ask myself is how can I not? So how can I not, when I talk about the lifelong impact of adoption, how can I not think about how might this decision be impacting on this child when they are the age that I am now, but now they're a 3 or 4 year old, and how can we possibly know what that impact, what that experience will be like for that child, what sense they will be able to make of their identity and their feeling of belonging at that point, when we don't know, when I'm still living with the experience, as are many other adopted people, alongside many adopted people who would have a different experience. Um, so what I think, every situation brings to me a new way of thinking about my own experiences and my own sense of belonging. So, do I prioritize for this child the idea that they will be placed in a loving, caring home above the idea that that home may not be the best cultural, educational, class, race, ethnicity match for that child? Can I be assured that that child will have the support that they need from their new family, friends, community, professionals, to support their sense of identity and belonging, that is going to be critical for them to be mentally well in the future? Um, and how do those decisions that I make influence the way that I think and rethink and construct and reconstruct my own experiences, and how I think about those, and whether I think those have been positive, negative, helpful, destructive, or whether they have led me to involve myself in particular ways of being or behaviours that could have been done differently. Um, so I'm aware, as I say that there's not, that doesn't feel very clear, but I think what I'm saying is it's a process of learning. Every time I think about the work that I do, makes me think about who I am in relation to that and what it means for me, as much
Absolutely. No, no,
decision.
that makes total sense, Nick, because how can it be clear, right? Um, but what you're saying really is that, and because of the work that you do, you have to make very, very important decisions about another human being's life. And you know what that meant. I agreed you were a 70s child as opposed to a 2021 child. But and things have changed politically and socially and so on in this country. But equally, you know what it felt like. And what you're saying to me is you're constantly questioning your own instinctive unconscious biases,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
because you so want to do the right thing by that
Yeah.
child.
Yeah.
But of course, you never know because, once a child is adopted, it's not like you're going to be in charge and you meet the child when he or she is 45 or 49 years old to see how they turned out. So that's a really tough one. And so, is there any sort of mantra, anything you do on a daily basis that makes you question, or is it all these experiences that make you question? It seems to me that you're challenging unconscious biases on a minute-to-minute basis.
Yeah. Yeah, and well, hopefully, and engaging. I think one of the things that my training and social work training and psychotherapy training has invited me to do is to being able to take that position of questioning those unconscious biases on a day-to-day basis. So if I am having a particular response to something that I've read about a child and a family, asking myself the question, where do I think in the history of me that response is coming from? What particular experience or relationship or earlier interaction is leading me to think that this is okay, not okay, is making me feel or have an emotional response of anxiety or excitement or whatever. So being able to kind of take that moment, take that experience and think, where is that coming from? And some of that will happen in conversations. So I'll have conversations with people that I trust and respect who will be able to ask me those questions. This is a particular strong response you're having to this, Nick. What's that about for you? And some of that is about me inviting those conversations from other people and learning about my own response in the way that that conversation is going. So how come I'm having this response to this particular family situation, but to you that you seem to be having a different response? What does that say about us, our experiences, and our beliefs and ideas that underpin the way in which we think, the way in which we behave, and who we are as people and what we stand for? Because what we believe and what we think and how we behave tells a story about who we are, right? So those unconscious and conscious biases are constantly telling stories to other people about who we are, what we think, what's important, what's not important. So when I'm making those decisions, the social workers around me who I'm having conversations with will be able to say, well, Nick thinks that these relationships are really, really, really important, and this sense of belonging is really, really important. That's the story that they will tell about the way in which I approach those decisions.
Absolutely. I mean, you've said so much, and I just, for the listeners and for my own sake, I want to very briefly summarize, because what you're saying about challenging our own unconscious biases is really listen in, really tune into yourself, and not just about the language, but the emotions, the feeling.
Yes.
Why am I excited? Am I
Yeah.
worried? The actual feeling of emotion.
Yeah.
And then, if you can have the presence of mind to stop there and then, which often many of us don't, but at least on reflection, say, why did I feel that?
Yeah.
What could I have done differently? And it doesn't matter what the situation is, but these are lessons that we all need to learn from you, Nick, because
Yes.
um, all of us will have our own stories, as you correctly said, that would influence us to make decisions about whatever we're doing.
Yes.
Um, and can we really, really tune into ourselves? And you, fortunately, are working on it on a daily level. And I think certainly the advice I'm giving myself and all our listeners is that we all need to work on it. Um, and that's what makes us more equitable in how we communicate and work with other people and talk to other people. And it's better for us and our growth.
Well, it's better for us in our roles, and I think for me in my role and for my colleagues in our role, if unless we become aware of those ways in which we think and behave and interact towards others, particularly in ways that are inequitable or that perpetuate marginalization and oppression, um, we're not we are taking an unethical position. Surely it is not okay to behave in ways that oppress and marginalize others because we haven't recognized in ourselves an idea or belief that is contributing to that behavior. So I would take this kind of position of the challenging and questioning, certainly in my profession and to my colleagues, is we've got a duty to do it. It's an ethical responsibility, because if we don't, then we will perpetuate the inequalities that lead to institutional racism, disproportionality in the way that the public sector responds to people of colour, from a basic kind of, the inequitable way in which the police do stop and search, to the inequitable way in which adult mental health services compulsorily detain under the Mental Health Act more black and brown people than they do white people. That can't not be an effect of unconscious bias in my eyes.
I completely agree. And in fact, what I was also thinking, because of what you're saying, is that the advantage that you have is because you've been questioning your identity and who you are and how you see yourself. You have used that to genuinely do the right thing by yourself and about the society you live in. Whereas there are many of us, say me, for example, I know who I am. I'm of Indian origin. I grew up in India. I live here, X, Y, Z. Perhaps because I've not had the experiences that you have, people like me may not really go out there and do the right thing by the society we live in. And I think that's actually to your advantage. And also the fact that the work that you do makes you question your unconscious biases on a daily level. I think that's brilliant. But Nick Pendry, thank you so very much for sharing your stories with me.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, please do share with someone. That's the best promotion the podcast can have. The more we hear these amazing and brave stories from speakers around the world, the more we can learn about this important subject of unconscious bias. I'm Smita Tharoor. See you next week.